Hi. On behalf of Beacon House School System, the organizers of this conference, I'd like to welcome you to the 11th edition of SOT, A World of Tomorrow, Negotiating a Better Future. The School of Tomorrow event series was launched by Beacon House in the year 2000 to engage in conversations with local and global audiences and help inform the direction of the organization, the schools, and the society at large. My name is Ali Ahmed Khan, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of Beacon House, Pakistan. In my 8 years with the organization, it has been my privilege to attend 5 SOT events and meet visionaries, thought leaders, and change agents. And today, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our first fully virtual SOT event. Thank you for joining me on this panel, Freedom and Privacy in Information Societies, from Liberating Technologies to Orwellian Futures. As a prelude to our session, it is my honor to invite a special guest to set the tone of this discussion, His Excellency Umar Sultan Olama, the Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence, Digital Economy, and Remote Work Applications in the United Arab Emirates. He's also the Managing Director of World Government Summit and the Deputy Managing Director of Dubai Future Foundation. Today, he's taken time out from his busy schedule to speak at this session. Your Excellency, without further ado, may I request you to share your thoughts on the topic with our audience and panelists.
Thank you, Ali. It's an absolute pleasure being with all of you here today. And I do hope that in the near future we can meet physically beyond this time of pandemic. I also hope that all of your families and yourselves are safe and secure in this difficult time. And my condolences go to all of those who have lost loved ones because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, the last 3 months have been times of exponential change. These changes were extreme in most cases and really led to a transformation of our lives. If you spoke to experts previously, they would tell you that remote education, telemedicine, and many of the virtual services are to come in the next 5 to 8 years. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic and because of the outbreak that we have seen, this accelerated the pace of adoption of technologies in rates that we have never seen in the past. We've seen 3 years worth of transformation happen over the course of 3 months. And governments who invested in the right technologies and the right infrastructure early on were the ones that benefited the most from this transformation. Now, this transformation brought with it a lot of opportunities. It allowed for people to get their services on their smartphones and also allowed for service providers, whether it be the public sector or the private sector, to get more insight from their customers. This insight will help tailor services in the future and will also help provide proactive services rather than reactive services that we've seen in the past. Now, this is the good side of it, but there are also many questions that need to be answered over the course of the next coming months and years. These questions include: what exactly is the repercussion of this connectivity? What exactly are the repercussions of the data that we're giving to all of these providers? And what regulations need to be put in place to ensure that the citizen and the customer are secured, and also that the businesses and the governments can thrive in this new digital age? Now, one important factor of this transformation that we're going through is that customer or citizen trust is very, very important. Countries that rank very high in citizen trust are going to stand to benefit the most. And countries that rank very low need to do a lot more work to ensure that citizens are very relaxed and are trustworthy of their governments to ensure that they give them the data that is necessary. We are blessed in the UAE that when the pandemic happened, we were able to move from a physical to a digital government and operate 100% without hindrance in the course of a week. We were also lucky enough to be ranked among the highest countries on earth with regards to trust in government. So we have seen the good side of it, but we want to ensure that all governments can come together and can learn from each other in this new era. Now, the COVID pandemic is going to inevitably come to an end at some point in the future. But what will remain are the challenges that are going to be posed by these technologies and the questions that need to be answered. Let me share with you a few different prospects on what is to come. The first is, throughout history, we have always been at competition with ourselves. We've always tried to improve on what the last human being or the last person has improved before us. We have never been in competition with technology. And I think that that is something that has always made us feel like life is only going to be positive moving forward. Now, there are a lot of positive uses of technology, but there are also negative uses that we need to look at and address in the coming years. And a few of them are things that we have seen over the last 2 to 3 years that are starting to become more and more common. The first is artificial intelligence is dominating every single sector that we know. Artificial intelligence is the tool or the technology that is driving search engines, e-commerce platforms, and even educational platforms online that we are looking at today. This is leading to many good use cases. We're looking at how search engines today are allowing us to access the knowledge of humanity, the historic knowledge that we've developed over the millennia of years. But we've also seen artificial intelligence tools and platforms like social media platforms being used in certain circumstances across the world to influence politics, to push people towards racial or religious racism, and to also, in certain circumstances as well, lead to negative impacts, like people spending more than they actually have coming in, and that taking them into the debt trap. So what happens is, because of these tools' ability to collect a lot of data and to understand a lot of information about us, there is this need for us to look at governing them in the right manner. The other issue with technology as well that we need to look at addressing is, how do we ensure that no country is left behind and that no nation is harmed by it while others thrive from it? We need to move from being developing and developed in terms of how do we classify our countries to impacting and impacted, both in a positive sense. How do we create positive impact, and how do we ensure that we are being impacted positively by these technologies? And that is something that we need to address together, collectively. Finally, I'd like to touch upon education. Education is the key to the future. It's the key to any nation and its prosperity in the future. It's also the key to building, whether it's a society or the economy of the future. Now, what the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us is that we could migrate education from physical to digital by allowing the teachers to give the classes on online platforms such as the one that we're using right now. But what we haven't reinvented is the way that education is done on these online platforms. Education is a very personalized and a very insightful profession. We need to ensure that we can leverage these technologies to empower the teacher and to also create tools that engage students even more, rather than distance from the teacher and from the curriculum. There's a lot of work for us all to do. And I think that we can only overcome these challenges if we all work together and put our heads together to ensure the success. I'm grateful to be with you here today and wish you all the best of luck and success with these endeavors. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a pleasant conference.
Thank you, Your Excellency. On behalf of our viewers, panelists, the SOT team, and Beacon House, I'm grateful to you for joining us and for raising these important points. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now we continue with our session. Thank you. So, all right. As we continue with our session, let me introduce you to three esteemed professionals, Ms. Nighat, Lord Jim Knight, and Mr. Jibran Nasir. Nighat is a lawyer and internet activist and the head of Digital Rights Foundation, an organization she set up to educate Pakistani internet users and to protect them, especially women, from online harassment. For her award-winning work, she was recognized in the Time magazine's list of Next Generation Leaders and is also one of the leading figures on the Information and Democracy Commission launched by the Reporters Without Borders organization. Jim Knight, the Right Honourable Lord Knight of Weymouth, is the Chief Education and External Officer at TES Global. He founded the TES Institute, which is now the 5th largest qualifiers of teachers in England. Jim served as a member of British Parliament from 2001 to 2009, during which time he was a Minister for Rural Affairs, Schools and Employment. Jim is a founder of X-Rapid Limited, the first company to sell disease diagnostic commercially via an iPhone app. Jibran Nasir is a lawyer, a civil rights activist, and the founder of Never Forget Pakistan, an NGO involved in advocacy for marginalized communities in Pakistan. He's also a trustee at a large trust, which provides health and social services. Most recently, he was involved in a highly organized campaign, which used a mobile app to build a database of low-income families hit by COVID-19 lockdown in the impoverished neighborhoods of Karachi to distribute food parcels to them in a safe way. Thank you all for joining me on this panel. In a dynamic and interconnected society where there is greater freedom of expression and speech, there is also potential threats to freedom and privacy. While providing us with a window to outside world, has technology also allowed invisible eyes to track our every move and word? Before we delve deeper into our topic, I would request our viewers to share their comments and questions using Facebook, YouTube, or SOT website, whichever platform you may be watching us on throughout the session. I will put them to our panelists in about 30 minutes. Let's begin. Nighat, do you think the trade-off between privacy and freedom is inevitable? Nighat, can you hear me?
It's a
Yeah.
right. So I was saying that it's basically a false dichotomy that we have created in terms of privacy and other freedoms. And if we view the right to privacy from a human rights perspective, it will be obvious that privacy is an enabling right that forms the bedrock for other rights such as freedom of expression and even right to information. For instance, journalists, activists, and citizens are much more comfortable voicing dissent if their reasonable expectation of privacy is guaranteed. And many people see privacy, the idea that certain information will be private, as an impediment to access to information. However, how I see it, it's both rights are not mutually exclusive. If some information holds value in terms of public importance, then expectations exist in the right to privacy for the larger societal good. And I would like to quote a landmark judgment here by our Federal Information Commissioner Zaid Abdullah in the case of Mukhtar Ahmed Ali versus National Assembly. The Federal Commission under Right to Information Act 2017 maintained that the public information officer in Pakistan cannot demand the national ID card from an applicant, because there is a practice in Pakistan. Everywhere you go, they basically ask you the copy of your national ID card number, national ID card. And so they maintain that the commission cannot ask a national ID card number from a Pakistani citizen in case of they are filing an application or around right to information. And the commission was of the view that the requirement of acquiring national ID card, the copy of national ID card by the public bodies for the provision of requested information has serious privacy implications, and it is in violation of Article 14 of the Constitution, which grants a fundamental right of privacy to Pakistani citizens. And this article is also of paramount importance in absence of any data protection legal regime in Pakistan.
Okay. Thank you, Nighat. Jim, do you think this is a trade-off? Is it a good trade-off? Is it a bad trade-off?
I think it depends where you live. You know, if I'm currently a activist in Hong Kong campaigning for freedom, I have neither privacy nor freedom, and you know, I'm in a pretty bleak situation right now. In my country, I guess the trade-off, you know, post 9/11, we had a trade-off around security and privacy, where suddenly, you know, and I was a member of parliament and on our defence committee, and we were concerned about how we monitored threats from potential homegrown terrorists, and the security services needs to impact on privacy. Now, as a result of COVID, when I went and met a friend for a drink in a bar the other day, I had to give my email address and name and phone number to the bar so that they could trace me if an infection occurred amongst any of the customers over a 21-day period in that bar. That's an invasion of my privacy in exchange for an ability perhaps to be able to trace infection and deal with this pandemic that's blighting our lives at the moment. It really depends on the regime you're in, whether it's good or bad. You know, I'm happy with the trade-offs in my country. I wouldn't be happy in some other countries.
Okay, so basically they're locational and subjective to what other things
and I think,
happening.
you know, we just heard from His Excellency, I think, you know, a really good opening, and he talked about trust, and it goes, that trust is right at the heart of this. How much do we trust the government, or how much do we trust Facebook, who are also collecting our data and know all about me too?
Yes. Okay. Jibran, in your opinion, so we will come specifically to this locational issue later on in the discussion, but in your opinion, these trade-offs, who defines the limits? Where do we draw the line? What is good? Should it be the tech companies? Should it be the government? Or should it be consumers?
Before I come to addressing the question, since a gentleman representative of the UAE government was made part of this session, rather sets the tone for the session, I must comment that yes, it is groundbreaking that the world has its first artificial intelligence minister, but it is also very alarming that it is in one of the most oppressive regimes when it comes to freedom of privacy and freedom of speech. Perhaps if the gentleman had stayed longer, then we could have perhaps had this discussion to understand and analyze the dangers which the spread and expansion of information technology poses. Now, coming to your question, in the modern state, which most of the world is right now divided into, there is a tri-party relationship. Within that tri-party relationship, there's a bilateral relationship between the state and the citizen, and then there's a parallel relationship between citizens. And based on that citizens' relationship between themselves, that social contract, whereby they have agreed that they have given up a certain authority to the government to exercise its will over us. Now, this tri-party relationship can very easily identify the two kinds of dangers you have when it comes to information. Within this tri-party relationship, we have the other citizen. That other citizen could be a private legal body as well. That is a company, an entity like Facebook or Twitter, or it could be an individual. From that part of the relationship, we face threats like harassment, stalking, hate speech, perhaps commercialization of my data, or theft of my data, or theft of my identity, and then that data being used for different other commercial purposes. And then from the government point of view, I face a similar threat of surveillance and how that information of mine can be used to compromise me or to say, whatever, curb my rights. Now, when it comes to violations of these freedoms by the other citizen or by other entities, we rely on the government to come in and regulate that space, to ensure that nobody is ripping off benefits of my information, to ensure that nobody is stalking or harassing me, or to ensure that nobody is indulging in hate speech. But what do we do when that same criminal or malicious mind is being exercised by the regulator, the government itself? Who is there to regulate the government? When the state has made it its objective and its aim that this should be a suffocated society, this should be a society where difference of opinion should not be tolerated, then I'm not surprised that, say, for example, in Pakistan, certain teachers and academics are not being tolerated because the state hasn't really promoted that culture of tolerance of difference of opinion. So when the regulator is at fault, then definitely others, private entities, all these social media organizations, all these Analytica groups, Cambridge Analytica and all that, they get influenced and incentivized and motivated to also indulge in these criminal practice. So the fundamental question is that how do these citizens and how do these private bodies come together to also at any point in time take a stand and start regulating government?
Okay.
Or their space for that matter.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that there is a fine line between what the government dictates, and online medium is just one of the mediums on which the freedom of expression can be curtailed. But thank you for your point. Nighat, our digital footprint has increased considerably since the exponential growth of mobile phones or smartphones. Do you think the users have become wiser about the associated privacy risks?
So in the early days of Internet 2.0, there was an exponential increase in the tools available to collect and extract data to monetize our personal lives. And in those early days, we as users were willing to let go of a lot of privacy for the services we were offered because we were products and we didn't know that. However, this was mostly because, as it turns out, social media companies were not transparent and honest, as Jibran just said, about the extent of data collection and the ways in which that data was being used. But in the last few years, we have seen public discourse and consciousness on the issue of privacy with regards to the state, government, and companies. It has definitely shifted. And the conversation that followed the Cambridge Analytica issue was a sign that the public is much more conscious now. However, still we are not wiser in a lot of ways, to be very honest. There is still a long way to go. The algorithms used by companies, tech companies and governments to make key decisions, ranging from what we see on our timelines on Twitter or posts on our Facebook to the allocation of resources in the public policy are being made by the artificial intelligence and algorithms that are not transparent, and we have little control over how they are made. So issues with facial recognition technology, for instance, are being taken up by activists and few politicians in the West, but we don't see the same type of discourse in places like Pakistan, where national security always trumps all concerns regarding right to privacy.
Yeah, I guess that's true for pretty much all the countries. We've seen the Patriot Act and similar legislation in the UK. But Jim, do you think the government in the UK has taken steps post Cambridge Analytica scandal to protect the privacy of or improve protections for people?
I think the government has been too slow to act. It has come forward with some proposals in what they're calling their online harms white paper, where essentially they are putting a duty of care upon the tech platforms, not dissimilar to a duty of care in the real world that employers have or mining and oil companies have to protect the public. And what's helpful in legislative terms is you don't have to specify everything that they're not allowed to do. You just have to say, as a tech company, you have a general duty of care and you shouldn't do things that harm people. And your engineers and your planners need to think that through. And if you get it wrong, then you can be held to account for that. I think that is positive, but we're yet to see that come into law. And I've just done some work in a parliamentary committee around this, and it keeps getting put off. Now, it's been put off because of Brexit. It's been put off because of COVID. There's always another reason to put it off. And, I have to say there aren't that many legislators in Parliament who are that confident in talking about these things, because it's quite complicated understanding or trying to understand algorithms, trying to understand artificial intelligence, the way intelligence is implied, how profiles are being used by technology companies, how they are capturing data and using data to make a lot of money out of advertising. But there's an urgent need for us to legislate as a result of all of this, including in our electoral law, to protect our democracy from harm, which is what happened with Cambridge Analytica.
Yes, thank you. So Jibran, it's a good point. The profiles which are used and the profiling which was done by these companies. Do you think there is a risk for these kind of profiling to be used to curtail freedoms in Pakistan and as well as for Pakistanis abroad?
Most definitely, this risk exists all around the world, regardless of however we present ourselves vis-a-vis how our government is structured, that we are democratic or not. What we are really talking about is that side of the state which deals with the national security or surveillance or law and order. And they don't really prioritize democracy or democratic values or personal freedom over their own aims and objectives. They justify everything in the name of meeting their parameters to make what they call effective enforcement of law and order. Now, we must look around at what are the challenges communities and governments around the world are facing right now. Mass migration because of a lot of wars and because of economy and globalization. So demographics are shifting around the world. New voter bases are coming around. Immigration laws are being hardly contested. Clash of cultures and collisions are happening. That is also giving rise to xenophobia. That is also giving rise to racism once again. That is also giving rise to far right politics. Now, when this is what is happening, then most definitely a public opinion or public perception is a very important commodity. So what we must understand, what social media or what international media or what artificial intelligence is also doing, that it is making a commodity out of our perceptions. It is making a commodity out of our opinions. That commodity turns into a political currency for political party when Cambridge Analytica wants to use it. And that also turns into another material currency in terms of a regular dollar, yen, or rupee when you sell that information to a private party. So given the fact that world over, these challenges are being faced, when we talk about Pakistan, then of course in Pakistan, there's always a tug of war between institutions. And because of that tug of war, there's a constant aim and objective to compromise whoever you consider a threat. Now, if that threat is coming from the parliament, then politicians are compromised. If that threat is coming from judiciary, then they are compromised. If that threat is coming from the media, then journalists are compromised. If that threat is now coming from student groups and universities and academia, now then they are being targeted. So, and similarly, in that background, we should not have any naive view that there are good intentions behind the regulator when it comes to regulating our space. There are definitely very clear cut objectives for them. And we right now, or our opinions right now, or what we say right now, or our Twitter, our alter ego, our online alter ego is just a commodity right now for them.
Okay. So, well, in the present circumstance where pretty much all of us have to live and work online, Nighat, has your organization seen an increase in the online harassment cases?
Ali, before I respond to this question, I just wanted to comment on what Jim mentioned about the online harms rules. And I think going back to his first response, that it's very contextual and very subjective. And I think one thing that I have been saying for years, that the regulations and the policies that the Western governments introduce for their own jurisdictions, what we do in our country is to copy paste those policies and regulations. Currently, there is this very heated debate going on around online harms rules in Pakistan as well. I mean, although the UK has done multiple consultations around the white paper that has come out this year, but in Pakistan, it was just suddenly, this online harms rules document popped up, and we didn't even know that, what is the background, why they are bringing this up, and especially in country and jurisdiction where where you don't see the protections for the citizens are available. So we don't have data protection law, we don't have, other protections in place. So just wanted to comment on that. And coming to your question, yes, definitely we have seen I think the case has already been made by many women's rights activists and feminists during this time that violence against women has risen during pandemic. And unfortunately, the same holds for online spaces. According to the data from our cyber harassment helpline, we have seen that during the month of March and April 2020, there was an increase of 189% in complaints registered with the helpline. Around 74% of the cases in March and April were reported by women, 19% by men, and 5% by gender non-binary persons. So these cases were largely related to women in the digital sphere, and the types of cases were included sexual harassment in the online space, surveillance, unauthorized use and dissemination of personal data, blackmailing over personal data and intimate images, and manipulation of personal information, including images and videos that I have just mentioned.
Oh, okay, that's worrying. I'll come to that in a minute. But Jim, you just mentioned about the going to a pub and having to give your email address. So there are many countries which are looking at these contact tracing apps. Do you think will we be able to put the genie back in the bottle when the COVID-19 pandemic has passed?
I think it's a really good question. Technically, according to our data protection laws here in the UK, though that data that I shared willingly in exchange for a pint of beer, along with some money, was by law the pub has to delete that data within 21 days. And I have to trust that they will do that, and I have to trust that the Information Commissioner, the regulator, will punish the pub if they don't, and will find a way of finding out whether they do or they don't. But there's a lot of trust in that. There's a trust in the pub, and there's a trust in the regulatory system to in turn monitor the activity of all of the pubs in Britain who will be doing this, and all of the restaurants. Now, and I think, I referred earlier to 9/11 and the trade-off around security and privacy that we had and we've had subsequently in terms of the war against terror, or whatever we choose to call it. And I think the genie has not been put back in the bottle, because the world can't go back to pre-9/11, and it's not going to be able to go back to pre-COVID. And I think we will end up giving up some of our privacy in order for people to keep tracing us around infection risk. And we, as citizens in democracies, need to look really carefully. And we rely on people like Jibran and Nighat, who are activists in this space, to shine a light on where we've got the trade-offs wrong, and to challenge our parliamentarians and ensure that we keep readjusting so that there is something fair around the protection of privacy, which is enshrined in Constitution, and our security from health, from violence, from whatever we're trying to be secure from.
So it's an interesting parallel you drew between 9/11 and COVID-19, and I guess we have to worry about the loss of freedoms which happened after one. So Jibran, there was some great work which was done by a large trust for relief for these families, but they had to give up their data, or they had to, you had to make a database. Do you think something like that will become the norm for relief work, or is there any potentials for abuse of this data?
I think it's just an example of how data has been collected and how data can be used. You're just changing variables. You're just changing situations. In one situation, a gentleman is going to a pub and he needs a pint of beer, so he is forced to and compelled to give his data. In our situation, somebody is compelled to receive ration from us because there's no other source of income, so they're compelled to receive data. And just like there could be scenarios of exploitation of data in both things. What is more important here is what Jim just mentioned, that and of course, we mentioned it in good intentions, that it is for activists to come out and shine light on these issues. But I believe that activism should be there to only be making constructive and effective contributions, not to be a distraction by just elongating debates around issues. I find it very hard to fathom that how can publicly elected representatives who go door to door in their election campaigns and then get elected to the parliament and most definitely have tangible evidence that they represent the will of the people can somehow be more educated or more aware, less educated or less aware than activists on what are the concerns of the people, the same voter who's the user of technology. So why is it that parliaments around the world, now I'm pretty sure that every single parliamentarian around the world is using a smartphone. And I'm pretty sure every single parliament in this day and age has perhaps an email ID as well. And I'm pretty sure in terms of age demographics as well, there's a younger lot of technology users as well going into parliament. So why is it that we should wait for public protest? So why is it that we should wait for activists to come and then spend months and years on debates and debates and debates when they very well know what the issue is? Just pretending, and this goes for parliaments around the world. They very well know, because when they are bringing in a flawed policy, it is very naive to assume that they don't know it is flawed. They very well know it is flawed, and it is flawed for a deliberate reason, because it is used to benefit and expand the control of the state over citizens, and it is not equally and fairly being weighing in the public's benefit as well. So for us to assume that they got this bit wrong, or this thing is a loophole within the law, or this thing could be exploited, those loopholes are intentionally left there. We do realize that parliamentarians bring up laws which are drafted by very expert legal teams. There's an entire office of the Advocate and Attorney General in Pakistan. There's an entire law ministry in Pakistan. For us to believe that that paper was not read, of course that was read. But that was read, that bill was drafted through a particular security lens. The thing is that there are not enough stakeholders in the discussion. And my heart goes out to activists like Nighat and Faria Parvez and Osama Khilji and Sana Salim and others who really are pioneers and trailblazers when it comes to protecting digital rights. But even there, but then again, I think Nighat is a better place to answer that when they are in that Senate committee, are they really being considered as stakeholders, or is it just a formality the government wants to get done with so they can write in a presser that, oh, we called on activists? Because I know that very well the government is aware of these issues. So activism should be taken and those policies should be implemented, rather than activists are just used as a means of delaying debates around issues where the actual menace has been caused, that flawed policy has been implemented. PECA is a reality in Pakistan right now. We can debate all we want about its reform, but it is a reality for the past 3 years or 4 years, and it's going to go on to be a reality. And the government already knows what's wrong with it.
So the lack of knowledge you mentioned, whether it is deliberate or not, is, I think, across the world, and it applies to other legislation as well. For example, the fossil fuel legislation or any environmental legislation which comes about, there are always some loopholes kept for some reason or other, and that's how the governments work. But Jim, do you think the government regulations can protect us, or do we as individuals have to do more to understand the risks and take our own actions? You're on mute, Jim.
Yeah, good, thank you. I don't have the power to unmute myself. So I have to wait. Just to, before I answer that, I just say to Jibran, as a parliamentarian, I guess certainly in my country, the government is formed by the party that has the most parliamentarians elected. So instantly, they have a vested interest in the state. And the opposition parliamentarians obviously have a job to scrutinize, but they don't have the power because they don't have the votes. And certainly in my country, we have a winner-takes-all democracy, which causes the problems that he rightly identifies. In terms of your question, it's a shared responsibility between the individual and government. But government needs to take the lead. So, it is hard for an individual to, even if they know how Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google work, and what they are getting for those free services in terms of giving up their data and their privacy. Even if they understand all that, yes, they could walk away and not use those services. But they are then walking away from the social space that most of the world is occupying. And that's a big decision for them to make individually, to not go to where everyone else is, to become more isolated, essentially. But government has a responsibility to educate its citizens about how these things work, and that in turn creates the political pressure on governments to regulate them better. And then governments need to cooperate, because Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, these are more powerful, richer organizations than the vast majority of countries. And it should be, I'm really glad that the European Union has made some big progress on the regulation of some of these platforms, but we need countries working together in order to do this, to get some kind of sovereignty back, some governance of these big tech companies back for citizens to protect us.
Yes, I guess exclusion is not the best option. And as you mentioned, GDPR is a very good law, but then people say that it has loopholes as well. So Nighat, what kind of education your organization is doing to prevent some of these other mentions, the terrible things you mentioned, which people have to face online? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Digital Rights Foundation has introduced number of initiatives over the course of last 10 years, from holding governments accountable to holding companies accountable. But at the same time, we also realize that the end users who are, at the end of the day, they are the victim of, either the privacy breach or the cyber harassment or the new policies and regulations that the government introduces here. We decided to initiate a couple of initiatives. One was called Hamara Internet campaign, and it means our internet. And we started working with young girls across Pakistan in schools, colleges, and universities. And the campaign was launched in 2012. And we so far we have covered hundreds of educational institutes from Karachi to Swat and Muzaffargarh to Gilgit-Baltistan, educating young people about digital citizenship, awareness around how to combat cyber harassment and address privacy breaches, as well as digital safety and security. So all of this material is available on our website in both English and Urdu. But we also realized that, there was no national helpline specifically addressing the issues of cyber harassment, because we were getting lots of complaints from women, especially from far-flung areas, not just women, even men, who actually found themselves trapped in cyber harassment and blackmailing over intimate images. So we decided to initiate a national toll-free cyber harassment helpline back in 2016, and it's a region's first helpline, which provides three services to the victims of cyber harassment with regards to digital safety, legal advice, and mental health counseling. We work with journalists, activists, and other civil society organizations, NGOs, to educate them what are their digital rights, but also online safety, and how they can also raise their voice around the digital rights violation or the draconian regulations and laws that are being introduced here. It was PECA that Jibran mentioned, enacted in 2016, but now there are like number of policies and regulations that are being introduced, from online harms rules to registration of virtual private networks. So, these are the battles that, beside educating end users, which is, by the way, not our job, this is the government job and the tech company's job. it's our free labor for them that we are doing. But when it comes to citizens, we thought these are the very important initiatives that we really need to introduce in Pakistan.
Yes, well, it's absolutely wonderful work you're doing. Jibran, Nighat also mentioned this about this new research which is awaiting publication about AI, which can predict criminality using facial recognition. It's a bit like Minority Report. Any comments?
It all comes down to how you define criminality and who is defining criminality. Perhaps at a point in time, demanding my legal constitutional right can be viewed as criminal behavior by an oppressive state or regime. So, as I said, see, nothing really has changed. Technology has only made things faster and quicker. I usually give an example that when we did not used to have Twitter, we all have this phenomena of Twitter trolls, where a handful of people would come and tweet in a bulk and then make something a trend, a certain political slogan, a trend, giving an impression that this is perhaps what the country is thinking, or this is perhaps the view shared by the government. When we did not have Twitter, say go back to the 15, 20 years, when a group of miscreants wanted to do this, they would step out at night and they would take a spray paint and then they would do wall chalking throughout the city, writing slogans in favor of a political leader or something. And then the next day, the entire city will wake up and the impression they're trying to give is that this is what the city and the streets are demanding and saying. That was trolling of that era. This is trolling of this era. Things are only just much more connected now. Things are just more fast now. Otherwise, human behavior has not really evolved in the past 50 years. It has definitely over a longer period of time, over centuries. But this technology bulge just came in the past 5 decades. During this time, human behavior hasn't really evolved or changed.
Good point. So, Jim, do you think that, as Jibran mentioned, how does one protect the whistleblowers, the activists who are trying to speak for the people? Do the governments want to do that, or how do we do it?
Generally, governments don't want to do that. And it's important that we ensure that the governments are not allowed to get away with that. Whistleblowers are hugely important in terms of being able to show where there are failings. We saw that in the early days of the COVID crisis here, where we were relying on whistleblowers working in the health service to tell everyone that we didn't have enough personal protective equipment for them to keep themselves safe in hospital. And there are countless examples where that's really important. And the parliamentary work that I did, Nighat talked earlier on about how the UK government publishing proposals on online harms then spreads without consultation into Pakistan's debate. Which is very interesting to hear. Certainly, in the parliamentary committee work that we did, we debated whether, at some length, whether or not anonymity is a good thing on social media, because if you allow people, as they do on Twitter, for example, to post anonymously, they can post a lot of hate anonymously. Yeah. They can abuse people, public figures, they can abuse other people. They can spread dangerous ideas. We've seen the rise in conspiracy theories around vaccination and Bill Gates causing COVID, or 5G causing COVID, or people continuing to spread the madness of injecting yourself with disinfectant that came from the President of the United States. People are sharing things and are vulnerable to things, and we need to be able to hold them to account. But we concluded in our parliamentary committee that we should not advocate the end to anonymity on social media, because in many places, including in the UK, there are times when you want the cloak of anonymity for whistleblowers to be able to point out what's going on, particularly in those regimes where they may be punished for doing that.
So, Jibran, it seems that the governments have little incentive to protect that, but yourself as a civil rights activist, how are you adapting to this digital future where there's very little which is private, and you're very vocal as well? How do you see things, the landscape for you or people like yourself?
Activism isn't really a place to complain. It's voluntary work. You sign up for it. Nobody really forces you to do this thing. So I don't think when you are out there trying to, or even think that you may bring about any change, or you may want to show a mirror to society, then you should not really complain about. You know on day one the backlash you're going to face. So yes, you can cry foul about it, and you can say this is not right, but one should not be surprised about it. And I think one should also, those who want to do activism and those who want to, we should of course encourage free speech and such behavior. But at the same time, I think we should also let young people know that there is a price to pay with it, and they should mentally prepare themselves for that. Otherwise, disillusionment also happens very quickly, because it is a very naive way to think that, oh, I am trying to reform society for the better. Why is everyone against me? So the world does not work in that way. People don't like to change their ways, especially those in power never like to concede any power. They only want to expand upon their power. And because of modern states and international laws, what has changed is that now physical borders cannot expand. So the only battle of expansion is the control within the state. So that old concept of separation of powers, which we actually inherited from our colonial masters, and so we have inherited our democracy as well. What that concept had its own virtues as well, but those are being lost right now. That we perhaps cannot expand the borders of Pakistan, so within Pakistan we can perhaps expand our control, and that's what's happening right now by certain institutions.
Yes, and of course the expansion of culture is also something which also continues. Jim, as an educationalist, do you think digital privacy education should become a part of the curriculum and be taught in schools?
It's definitely. I think it is essential, and we see some countries doing this already. Finland, Estonia, and Europe are really good examples. And interestingly, that is informed by a cultural sense of threat from Russia, and so they see the threat of cyber attack from Russia, and so it becomes something that is natural for them to want to teach all of the citizens of those countries about online safety, online harm, cyber threat, the need for vigilance, etc., online, and so on. In my country, we have next to nothing. It's pretty hopeless, and we are trying to push our government here in Parliament to bring in some consistent digital and media literacy into our curriculum, so that young people are better equipped to differentiate misinformation from information when they're online. You know, we need them to know not to inject themselves with disinfectant. We need them not to attack 5G masts. We need them to wear masks when they're being asked to wear masks, to keep themselves safe and to, more importantly, keep other people safe from their asymptomatic disease carrying. So society needs people to be more educated about this, and school's a great place to start.
And we at Beacon House are trying our best to educate our students about this. But Nighat, do you see technology evolving to give us more privacy in the future? Do you see, what kind of light do you see at the end of this tunnel?
I definitely see there is more awareness now when it comes to the problems that can come with tech. The realization that technology is not a silver bullet and can often create more issues than it solves. However, if tech companies continue to grow, as Jim has mentioned multiple times in his conversation, the imbalance between individual users and the power that they hold will continue to grow. Lack of transparency, profiting from private data, which is surveillance capitalism, and decision making by private actors are issues that persist. Some companies are making oversight boards that will hold these companies accountable over their decisions. And being a member of independent oversight board of Facebook, I think a lot of responsibility lies on boards like us as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. So it's a huge task ahead of boards like oversight board, that they need to do their jobs more efficiently, keeping in mind international human rights framework and the individuals' rights. Users have to be willing to demand more from their states, and tech companies push for strong. I have seen in my work that there is always a push for strong legislations and policies and regulations, but it should come with a very informed decision that all right, we are asking for the data protection law, but at the same time we have to break the monopoly of big tech, and with more legislations we don't want more regulations and restrictions over internet.
Thank you. Before I move to the Q&A part of and there are some questions, is there any final thoughts you'd like to take from what Nighat just said?
No, I think we should have questions.
Oh, great. So there's a very interesting one which we didn't discuss at all. We cannot control our data. Hackers are free. What do we? So we didn't discuss the hacking problem, which seems to be plaguing the tech industry for a long time, and there is very little. Pretty much every organization we know has had some kind of a technology problems where consumer databases have been stolen, their credit card numbers, medical records. Do you think that's the biggest risk for us?
If you're asking me, I would say
yes.
It's an important part of the risk, because even if I were to come off all social media, there would still be a lot of data being collected about me, be it facial recognition data from me just walking down the street from closed circuit television cameras to how I'm using my credit card. There's all sorts of data that's being collected about me. And that data is only as, in terms of my privacy, I can sign off consent to various bodies to hold that data for legal purposes that provide me with a service. But if that data is then hacked, then obviously I lose privacy considerably. And one of the threats that we're all having to be educated about and to learn to be watchful for is identity theft, and that very much comes as a result of that hacking, and that can damage any and all of us. And my parents have both been attacked in terms of the people using hacked information that they've then tried to use to steal their identity. They're older, they're more vulnerable, they don't understand the technology. So I feel privileged because in a way I'm less likely to be targeted, because perhaps I am, I hope, somewhat wiser as to the techniques that they're using, but none of us can afford to be complacent.
And I think some of those techniques could also be part of that curriculum or education which we do in this. But Nighat, do you see that this is typically it was the case, do not put anything on the internet you don't want people to see. But these days, where our phones back up our pictures, which are not public, but they are for private space, in our private space, hacking is a serious problem. How can we avoid some of this?
So I think, Ali, there are like two aspects to this. One is, when people demand more laws and regulation, I think one of the demand behind the problematic law, Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, was that, and this was the demand from the citizens also, that, we need some legal regime where, if our data is, if there is a identity theft or data being hacked, do we have any legal remedy? At the same time, I think that was also the argument that the government used, that we need to protect our citizens, and that's how the legislation was enacted. But the law also has this particular provision to protect their citizens around identity theft and hacking attempts and all of this. But at the same time, so we need to also see that what kind of they enacted the law but how they are implementing the law. So are they really, they have those resources, they have those sophisticated training around, catching hackers who are doing this? At the same time, I feel I really don't want to put more burden on the users in terms of expanding their own knowledge base around the apps and the online platforms that they are using. At the same time, I feel it's important for end users to make very informed decisions. What are the what kind of data they are putting up online? What are the apps that they are using? Have they ever read the privacy policies that are, they just like click on I agree and then start using those apps? So how much data we also compromise every day in the form of using different apps and platforms? And so I think there are like two aspects to this conversation.
Yes. I don't think I haven't read many privacy policies. I'm sure you have, but it's not something which most people read, unfortunately. There's more of a comment than a question.
I'd like to add to it, the hacking question. I don't consider hacking itself a big concern or a problem, because what we're talking about is criminalized behavior, which means we have agreed on the fact through legislation and through detailed legislation that hacking is something wrong and it is criminalized behavior. And then there's a government which through that legislation has already showed its intentions that if caught, that person would be prosecuted. What I have a problem with is ethical hacking. And who defines that? Private companies are using ethical hackers, but so are government using ethical hackers, and now also intelligence agencies are using ethical hackers. Now that is a behavior which has not been defined or criminalized anywhere. So I'm less concerned with behavior which I can for something which I can take somebody to court. But then there's a completely unlegislated, vague area called ethical hacking, and everybody in their own way can define, given that situation, on what they consider what. And secondly, when it comes to informing people, it's the same. See, as I said earlier, technology has evolved in the past 5 decades, but human behavior has not really evolved. In fact, we've been slow to catch up to technology in many ways. So social media or internet is just like the street. Just like we educate our children not to do certain things out in the street, to be careful who they interact with, to be careful who they meet, to be careful how they are dressed, how they are sitting, how they're behaving, how they're speaking with people. Similarly, it's the same understanding and training which needs to go into the social media space as well, because it's a public space, it's a domain. So it's like a virtual street. So that the same concern needs to go. The only thing is that because outside of that computer screen or outside that of mobile screen, because the ambience around us is our safe comfort, is our office space, or is our bedroom, or is our house, that we tend to become a bit more relaxed, and we are not really on our toes, and our radars are not really, antennas are not really on as it is in the street. So maybe that's why we perhaps are complacent in our behavior. But otherwise, it's the same dangers as you have when you're dealing with any other public space.
Yeah, I guess there's that generational gap between the older generation, which doesn't understand the threats of this technology fully as well. So there's a question, which is more of a comment, but Jim, you can take this. How can publicly elected representatives somehow be less aware than activists? Why do they wait for public protests and activists to remind us of our responsibility?
Some publicly elected representatives, but when they're in opposition, are well aware and can do a great job in articulating the problems and work in alliance with activists, and and that's an important part of democracy. It sort of comes down to what the democratic setup is in a country. If you have a separately elected executive, through a president or some other system, then one would hope that Parliament, being less wedded to government, but more as a legislative body, can then be more honest in terms of its relation, and be more aware and be in the same place as activists. Problem in my country is we don't have a directly elected executive. The government is formed from the representatives. And so the representatives have a much more vested interest to be on the side of government and less so on the side of activists. And that is a problem.
Okay. Nighat, there's a question which is specifically for you. It says, I'm afraid that involving school children in these sensitive cyber issues will divert their attention from studies. Yes, have you seen evidence of that?
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I feel that it's all the more important now to involve students in all these discussions, because a lot of the term cyber criminal behavior, I think we have seen on our helpline that a lot of young people who are educated, studying in elite schools, they are getting into that behavior because they have no knowledge that, and most of the time they are doing it unknowingly, because they don't know whether it constitutes a cyber crime. And I think it's all the more important now to tell them that what are the preventive measures that they can take, what kind of draconian laws we have which sort of criminalize certain behaviors in the cyberspace, and at the same time how they can also become the ambassadors in terms of raising awareness around digital rights and cyber harassment issues, and become those people who actually spread the word around. I feel that they know more than us right now, and I think we are the ones who need to learn from them. So I mean, I don't see any harm in involving school children and schools and educational institutes. In fact, schools actually need to introduce adaptive curriculum around digital citizenship, where they can teach children that how they can become a proper citizen in the cyber world.
And let me just very quickly say, if you think school just exists for kids to pass exams, then I disagree with you. I think school, most importantly, is to prepare people to thrive in life, and so you have to teach them about this.
Jibran?
Specific question to me is the same question?
Yes, the same question. The one about more our parents being concerned that we should just avoid children on the social media or digital space as opposed to educating them. There's a lot of parents who think that.
See, the thing is that history has witnessed that forget parents and forget a family and forget a household. History has witnessed what happened to civilizations which resisted the surge of technology. When the Islamic civilization said no to the printing press, we went behind 500 years, and we still to this day curse and condemn that day when that decision was taken. So technology is going to sweep you away. It's not going to wait for you. The world around you is changing because technology is driven by economic interests, and economic interests never cease to, take hold and lay siege to whatever our wills and desires be. So it's better to prepare ourselves for the world around us rather than expecting the world to change around at our pace. So just like when competition increases, you send your children to special schools to train for competitive exams. When if it's a hotly contested admission seat for a university or for the armed forces or for government jobs. Similarly, if you want to prepare your children in this new model of interpersonal interaction, in this new model of human society, human interaction, then you need to really take it hands-on, make yourself aware with it, and get comfortable with it, so that your children benefit from a wholesome upbringing, where in a world where technology is part of is a very integrated part of it now.
That's a very good thought to leave this on. So this is all we have time for. I'd like to thank His Excellency Umar Salman Olama, my esteemed panelists, Ms. Nighat, Lord Jim Knight, and Mr. Jibran Nasir for their time and valuable input on this important topic. I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in, sharing their comments and questions. I'm sorry we could not take all your questions, but we'll keep the conversation alive on the SOT website. Please visit the SOT website, www.sotevents.com, for more information on other thought-provoking discussions taking place today, tomorrow, and Sunday on the School of Tomorrow conference. Stay safe, both online and offline. Bye-bye.
Thank you.